Welcome to WWO Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. The summer of 1940. A pall of stunned silence hangs over France. The formidable French army, once the pride of Europe, has been shattered by the blitzkrieg in a mere 6 weeks. German jackboots echo on the Champs-Élysées, and the swastika flag flies from the Eiffel Tower. For the French people, it is a time of profound shock and humiliation, the beginning of a long, dark night known as les années noires, the dark years. In Paris, the German military administration, headquartered at the opulent Hotel Majestic, attempts to project an image of disciplined, correct occupation. Soldiers are ordered to be courteous, cafes remain open, and the vibrant life of the city seems to flicker on, a ghost of its former self. But this veneer of normalcy is razor-thin. Beneath it lies a brutal reality of rationing, curfews, and the ever-present threat of the Gestapo. The man in charge of this precarious situation is General Otto von Stülpnagel, the military governor of France. A career officer from an aristocratic Prussian family, Stülpnagel is a product of the old Imperial German army. He is not a fervent Nazi Party ideologue, but a conservative nationalist who views the occupation through a military lens. Maintain order, suppress dissent, and exploit French resources for the German war effort. He believes stability is key, a goal that will soon bring him into direct conflict with the radical terror-based policies dictated from Berlin. Meanwhile, in the shadows, the first embers of resistance are beginning to glow. Scattered, disorganized, and initially focused on small acts of defiance like clandestine newspapers and intelligence gathering, these disparate groups represent a flicker of hope against the overwhelming power of the occupier. But as 1941 unfolds, these embers will be fanned into a raging fire, sparking a vicious cycle of violence and reprisal that will test the conscience of every man in a uniform, both French and German. June 22, 1941. Thousands of miles to the east, the German war machine launches Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This colossal event sends shockwaves across Europe, fundamentally transforming the nature of the French resistance. Before this, the powerful and highly organized French Communist Party, bound by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, had remained officially neutral towards the German occupiers. But with the attack on their ideological homeland, everything changes. Overnight, communist cells across France activate, shifting from passive opposition to armed struggle. Their orders from Moscow are clear: open a second front in the west, disrupt the German occupation, and tie down as many enemy troops as possible. Their methods are direct and lethal. On August 21, 1941, a young communist militant named Pierre Georges, later known by his nom de guerre Colonel Fabien, walks into the bustling Barbes Rochechouart metro station in Paris. He calmly approaches a German naval cadet, Alphonse Moser, draws a pistol and shoots him in the back. The attack, a game-changer, marks the first assassination of a German serviceman in Paris. The German response is swift and furious. Posters appear across the city, printed in bold red and black ink, announcing that in retaliation, French prisoners will be executed. This establishes the horrific arithmetic of occupation. French lives for German blood. The policy, known as the Geisel Codex or Hostage Code, is designed to crush the will of the populace through collective punishment. The logic is simple and barbaric. Turn the French people against the resistance by making the price of defiance unbearably high. Every act of resistance would now be paid for with the lives of innocent hostages, often political prisoners, communists, Jews, or simply individuals in the wrong place at the wrong time, rounded up and held for the sole purpose of being killed in reprisal. This policy sets the stage for a dramatic escalation, a spiral of violence that will soon reach a breaking point and force individual German officers to confront the legality and morality of the orders they are sworn to obey. The coastal city of Nantes, October 20th, 1941. The autumn air is crisp as Lieutenant Colonel Karl Hotz, the Feld commandant of the region, walks towards the cathedral for morning mass. He is a key figure in the German occupation structure, an engineer by trade, responsible for overseeing the administration and security of the Loire-Atlantique department. For the local resistance, he is the face of the enemy, a symbol of German power that must be struck down. As Hotz and his aide-de-camp, Captain Wilhelm Sieger, cross the street, two figures emerge from the mourning crowd. They are young communist resistance fighters, Gilbert Brusline and Marcel Berderias. A third, Spartaco Gisco, acts as a lookout. The plan is brutally simple. Brusline pulls out a 6.35 pistol. At close range, he fires two shots. The first hits Hotz in the back, the second fatally wounds him. Captain Sieger is also hit but survives. In the ensuing chaos, the assassins melt back into the city streets, leaving the high-ranking German officer dying on the pavement. The news travels like lightning, first to General von Stülpnagel's headquarters in Paris, and then on to the Führer's Wolf's Lair headquarters in Rastenburg, East Prussia. The assassination of such a senior officer is a direct challenge to German authority, an act of defiance that cannot be ignored. In Paris, Stülpnagel understands the gravity of the situation. He immediately issues a proclamation imposing a strict curfew, closing all public places, and offering a massive reward of 15 million francs for information, leading to the capture of the perpetrators. He knows that Berlin's reaction will be extreme, but even he is not prepared for the sheer scale of the retribution that is about to be unleashed. The death of Karl Hotz is not just another casualty of war. It is the trigger. It is the event that will push Hitler's policy of terror to a new, horrifying level, setting in motion a chain of events that will lead to the execution of dozens of innocent men and force a crisis of conscience within the German command itself. The teletype machines in the Hotel Majestic clatter furiously. The message from Hitler's headquarters is chillingly clear and bears the Führer's personal, vengeful imprint. Enraged by the assassination of Karl Hotz and a nearly simultaneous attack in Bordeaux, Hitler bypasses the established chain of command to issue a direct, non-negotiable order. For the death of Hotz, 100 French hostages are to be executed immediately. If the assassins are not captured within 48 hours, another 50 will face the firing squad. The order is a quantum leap in the brutality of the occupation. It is not a measured military response. It is state-sponsored terror on an industrial scale. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the OKW, the German Armed Forces High Command, formalizes the decree. He dictates that the victims should be chosen for their political affiliations: communists, Gaullists, and Jews. Their deaths are intended to be a public spectacle, a bloody lesson to the entire nation. The policy is codified and distributed throughout the occupied territories, making it clear that any act of violence against German forces would be met with disproportionate, overwhelming force against the civilian population. This policy of mass reprisal was not born in a vacuum. It was an extension of the brutal logic already being applied on the Eastern Front, where the infamous Commissar Order sanctioned the summary execution of Soviet political officers. Now, this ruthless ideology was being imported to the West. The goal was twofold. First, to deter future attacks by making the consequences unimaginably severe. Second, and more cynically, to drive a wedge between the resistance and the general population. The Nazis hoped that the French people, fearing for their own lives and the lives of their loved ones, would turn against the partisans, viewing them not as heroes but as reckless agitators who brought death and suffering upon the community. For General von Stülpnagel and his officers in France, Hitler's decree is a moral and strategic nightmare. It transforms them from soldiers into executioners, tasked with carrying out mass murder against unarmed prisoners. The order from Berlin is absolute, backed by the full authority of the Führer. To disobey would be an act of sedition. Yet, to obey would be to participate in a war crime, an act that many old-school professional soldiers found repugnant and dishonorable. In his Paris office, General Otto von Stülpnagel faces the greatest crisis of his career. He is a soldier of the old Prussian school, a man who believes in a strict, if severe, code of military conduct. War, in his view, was fought between armies, not against civilians. Hitler's order to execute 150 hostages is, to him, not just a moral abomination but a catastrophic strategic blunder. He sits down to compose a lengthy memorandum to Field Marshal Keitel, a document that is both a protest and a warning. He argues that such mass executions are contrary to the soldierly conception of fighting a chivalrous opponent. He writes that this policy will be counterproductive, that it will not crush the resistance but will instead fuel it, creating a generation of martyrs and driving countless more Frenchmen into the arms of the underground. He insists that it will besmirch the honor of the German army and make the already difficult task of governing France impossible. Stülpnagel's argument is pragmatic, not purely humanitarian. He is concerned with maintaining control and believes that terror is a blunt instrument that will ultimately backfire, uniting the French people in a shared hatred of the occupier. He proposes an alternative: executing only those already condemned to death for specific offenses and focusing on capturing the actual perpetrators. He attempts to negotiate, to reason with Berlin, using the language of military strategy and political expediency. But his pleas fall on deaf ears. The order comes back from Berlin. The executions will proceed. Stülpnagel is trapped. He cannot openly defy a direct order from Hitler without facing a court-martial and likely execution himself. But he cannot bring himself to fully comply. He engages in a desperate form of bureaucratic resistance. He plays for time, questions the lists of hostages provided by the SS, and uses his authority to subtly limit the scope of the slaughter. He ultimately authorizes the execution of 48 hostages at Chateaubriand, Nantes, and Mont Valérien, and a further 50 in Bordeaux. It is a horrific number, but it is less than the 150 Hitler demanded. It is a small, tragic compromise born of a terrible dilemma. For Stülpnagel, it is a personal defeat. He has been forced to sanction the murder of innocent men, an act that violates his deepest principles as an officer. The events of October 1941 break something within him, setting him on a path that will ultimately lead to his resignation a few months later. He has stared into the abyss of the Nazi regime's nihilism and found that his traditional military code offers no defense against it. October 22, 1941. In a repurposed quarry near Chateaubriand, 27 men are led from their cells. They are political prisoners, mostly communists and trade unionists, selected to pay the price for an assassination they had nothing to do with. Among them is a boy who is not yet a man, 17-year-old Guy Mackay. Arrested a year earlier for distributing communist propaganda, he has become a symbol of youthful defiance. As the prisoners are lined up against wooden stakes, their voices rise in unison. They sing La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, their final act of rebellion against the occupiers. They shout Vive la France as the German firing squad takes aim. The volley of rifle fire echoes across the countryside, a sound that will reverberate through French history. Hours before his death, Guy Mackay was allowed to write a final letter to his family. In a clear, steady hand, he wrote of his love for his parents and brother, his lack of regret, and his hope for the future. He penned the now immortal words, "I am going to die." This letter, smuggled out of the prison, would become one of the most sacred texts of the French resistance, a testament to the sacrifice of a generation. He wrote that he would have liked to live, but what he wishes with all his heart is that his death serves some purpose. His death, and the deaths of the others executed alongside him, served a purpose far beyond what the Germans intended. Instead of terrorizing the population into submission, the executions at Chateaubriand and others like them became a powerful rallying cry. The victims were no longer anonymous prisoners. They were martyrs. Their faces appeared on clandestine leaflets. Their stories were told in hushed tones in cafes and homes, and their final letters were copied and passed from hand to hand. The German policy of reprisal had created heroes. Men like Charles Michels, a communist deputy in the French Parliament, and Jean-Pierre Timbaud, a steelworker and union leader, were transformed into icons of national resistance. The brutality of the policy exposed the true face of the occupation, stripping away any pretense of correctness or order. It demonstrated that this was not a conventional military occupation, but a war against the very spirit of the French people. The blood shed in the quarries and forts of France did not extinguish the flame of resistance. It fed it, turning a small fire into an inferno. While generals like Stülpnagel wrestled with policy from their headquarters, the brutal reality of the execution orders fell upon the shoulders of junior officers in the field. It was one thing to sign a directive in Paris. It was another to stand before a group of unarmed men and command your soldiers to kill them. It was at this level, face to face with the human consequences of Hitler's terror, that some men found a line they would not cross. One such man was Lieutenant Heinz Hornig. Stationed on the Eastern Front, his unit was ordered to round up and execute a group of Jewish civilians, including women and children, as a reprisal for partisan activity. The commanding officer laid out the task in cold, simple terms. For Hornig, a devout Christian, this was not a military order. It was a command to commit mass murder. Standing before his superior, Hornig made a decision that would define his life. He refused. He stated clearly that as a Christian, he could not and would not participate in the shooting of defenseless people. The reaction was immediate and harsh. He was screamed at, accused of cowardice and insubordination. He was told he would face the consequences. But what were those consequences? The post-war myth, often used as a defense at Nuremberg, was that refusing such an order meant immediate execution. But historical research, including studies of German military records, has shown this to be largely untrue. No German soldier is known to have been executed for refusing to participate in war crimes. Instead, Hornig was subjected to a different kind of punishment. He was arrested, stripped of his rank, and sent to the notorious Torgau military prison. There he was beaten, humiliated, and subjected to brutal treatment designed to break his spirit. He lost his commission and his career, but he held on to his humanity. His case was not unique. It was one of many documented instances where individual soldiers, at great personal risk, chose their conscience over their orders. Hornig's story, hidden for decades, serves as a powerful counter-narrative to the excuse of just following orders. It demonstrates that choice, however difficult and costly, was always possible. It was a choice between a life of obedience and complicity, and a moment of defiance that affirmed one's moral compass in the face of absolute evil. The acts of defiance were not confined to a single front or a single officer. Across the vast machinery of the Wehrmacht, small gears of conscience sometimes refused to turn. Another compelling example is that of Captain Wolfgang Sibille. Faced with a similar order to execute a group of prisoners, Sibille also refused to comply. Like Hornig, his objection was rooted in a fundamental sense of military honor and human decency. He saw the order for what it was, an illegal act that had no place in the conduct of a professional army. He made his stance clear to his superiors, fully aware of the potential repercussions. The pressure on officers like Sibille was immense. The Nazi system was built on the principle of Führerprinzip, or the leader principle, which demanded absolute, unquestioning obedience. Insubordination was the ultimate transgression. Furthermore, years of propaganda had dehumanized the enemy, particularly on the Eastern Front, portraying partisans and Jews as subhuman threats that needed to be eradicated without mercy. To defy an order to kill was to reject this entire ideological framework. It required not only moral courage, but also the intellectual fortitude to see past the pervasive brainwashing. The consequences for Sibille mirrored those for Hornig. He was not shot, but his military career was effectively over. He was subjected to disciplinary action, lost his command, and was ostracized. The system did not tolerate dissent, but its primary method for dealing with such cases of failed obedience among its own officers was often disgrace and imprisonment rather than a firing squad. These stories, meticulously researched by historians like James Holland, challenge us to reconsider the nature of guilt and responsibility within the German military. They show that while the vast majority of officers complied, either out of conviction, careerism, or fear, a significant minority did not. Their acts of refusal prove that the superior order's defense was, in many cases, a convenient fiction created after the war to evade responsibility. The choice was real. It was a stark and terrible choice between personal safety and personal integrity. By choosing the latter, men like Hornig and Sibille provide a crucial historical lesson that even in the most oppressive and violent systems, the capacity for individual moral action is never entirely extinguished. For General Otto von Stülpnagel, the reprisal executions of October 1941 were a point of no return. He had been forced to compromise his principles, sanctioning actions he believed were both immoral and strategically disastrous. Over the following months, the pressure from Berlin did not relent. The demands for harsher measures, for more executions, continued to flow from Hitler's headquarters, pushed by the fanatical elements of the SS and the Nazi Party who sought to escalate the terror in France. Stülpnagel found his position untenable. His authority was constantly being undermined by SS officials like Reinhard Heydrich, who operated with direct authority from Berlin and viewed the Wehrmacht's methods as soft and inefficient. The military governor was caught in a power struggle between his professional military ethos and the radical, genocidal agenda of the Nazi regime's inner circle. In February 1942, 4 months after the Nantes assassination, General von Stülpnagel formally requested to be relieved of his command, citing health reasons, a common euphemism for political disagreement. His resignation was accepted. His departure marked the end of the Wehrmacht's attempt to maintain a semblance of a correct occupation in France. He was replaced by his cousin, the far more ruthless General Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel. While this new commander would later become a key figure in the 20th July plot to assassinate Hitler, during his tenure in France, he oversaw a significant intensification of the reprisal policy. The cycle of assassination and execution only grew more vicious as the war progressed. The defiance of the elder Stülpnagel had, at best, a temporary and limited effect. It could not halt the inexorable logic of the Nazi system of terror. The policy of mass reprisals would reach its horrifying climax in events like the 1944 massacre at Oretter-sur-Glane, where an entire village was wiped out by the SS. Otto von Stülpnagel returned to Germany and held no further significant commands. After the war, he was arrested and held for trial, but he took his own life in a Paris prison in 1948 before he could be sentenced, a final tragic end for a man trapped between duty and conscience. When the guns of World War II finally fell silent, the world grappled with an unprecedented question: how to hold an entire nation accountable for unimaginable crimes. At the Nuremberg trials, the defense of Befehlsnotstand, the plea of superior orders, echoed throughout the courtroom. Defendant after defendant claimed they were merely cogs in a machine, that they had no choice but to obey, and that refusal would have meant their own death. For many years, this narrative held powerful sway, contributing to the myth of a clean Wehrmacht that was separate from the ideological crimes of the SS. However, the stories of defiance from men like General Otto von Stülpnagel, Leutnant Hornig, and Captain Sibille serve as a powerful and direct refutation of this defense. Their actions proved that choice was not only possible, but was actually exercised by some. Stülpnagel's resignation demonstrated that even at the highest levels, one could opt out rather than implement criminal policies. Hornig and Sibille's point-blank refusals at the sharp end of the execution process showed that even junior officers could uphold their moral compass. The critical finding of post-war historical research is that the penalty for such refusal was not death. It was disgrace, imprisonment, transfer to a penal battalion, or a ruined career. Terrible fates, to be sure, but fates that preserved one's life and one's honor. These acts of conscience complicate our understanding of the Third Reich. They reveal that the German military was not a monolith of fanatical killers. It was a complex human organization containing men of varying convictions, from true believers and opportunists to traditional soldiers, and in rare cases, moral dissenters. The legacy of these defiant officers is therefore twofold. First, it stands as an enduring testament to the power of individual conscience in the darkest of times. Their stories are a reminder that morality is not a luxury to be discarded in war, but a fundamental choice that defines our humanity. Second, their legacy is a crucial historical corrective. It dismantles the comforting but false narrative of universal, helpless obedience, forcing a more nuanced and accurate accounting of responsibility for the atrocities committed. They prove that even when surrounded by evil, the decision to not participate remains the ultimate act of resistance. Thank you for joining WWWO Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.